Hey guys, welcome to the Lifting Lindsay channel. Today I'm really excited to walk you through one of my favorite exercises when it comes to working the hamstrings in a more shortened position. And that is the lying leg curl, this incredible machine you see before you. This is a really awesome exercise. But a lot of times people will come to me saying one of two things. They'll say one, either they feel it hurting their low back or just kind of feeling it a lot in their low back or some aches in their low back. The second one that I actually think is a little bit more common though are people saying, hey, I'm only feeling this in my calves and I don't know why. Well, today I'm gonna walk you through proper setup and execution of this exercise, and we are gonna cover why you're feeling it in your low back or in your calves and what we can change or what we can do about it to really set things up for this to be a powerful tool for you to work your hamstrings. So keep in mind, when we are using the lying leg curl, we are working the hamstrings from the knee. So this here, okay? So knee flexion, closing the gap between your hamstrings and your calves. This motion here is what's contracting and shortening the hamstrings. So since we're working it from the knee and not the hip, like we would with a stiff leg deadlift, if we were doing it from here, now we're lengthening it from the hip, and as we come up, we're shortening the hamstring. But that's not what we're doing here, right? With the lying leg curl, we are working the hamstrings from the knee. So because of that, we want to line up our own joint, our pivot, with the pivot point of the machine. So every single lying leg curl is gonna have this pivot point that this actually works around, okay? So this pad here is working around this pivot. And that's where you really want to line up your knees. Now the problem is, when you're setting up, it's pretty hard to see if your knees are lined up really well because your head's way down there and it's kind of awkward to look back and really see if things are lined up or not. So let me actually show you a really fun trick to know whether things are lined up well or not. So when we set up here for the lying leg curl, if the knees are not lined up with the pivot point of the machine, you're going to see this pad here move up and down on the leg. Watch closely here as it starts more on my calves and then changes, and at the top, it's right there on my heel. And then it moves down. Do you see that? How it's just kind of rolling back and up here. So clearly, and I'm showing you in a very exaggerated way. Usually it's a little less noticeable. It's more like this, okay? But it's still noticeable. It's traveling up and down my leg. When your knee is lined up really, really well with the pivot point of the machine, it's not gonna do that at all. I know my machine well, so you'll notice now the pad is on my ankles and it's staying right there through that whole movement, okay? So that's tip number one. We really do need to line up that knee with the pivot point. Now let me walk you through more of the setup. So after you line up your knees really, really well, you're not gonna wanna arch up like this. I see people doing that. You're actually gonna wanna come down here. You're gonna brace the core, really engage it so that there's no arching of your back. And also when you engage it, there's not going to be your butt shooting up in the air. So oftentimes I'll see that, especially when people are doing this movement with far less control and they're just using momentum, or maybe they're really fatiguing and they're just trying to get from point A to point B. So what they'll do is they'll use momentum, they'll initiate and throw the pad up and then shoot their butt up in the air like that. And if you see how my back is arching here, that's why a lot of people, when they shoot their butt up in the air, they are feeling it a lot in their low back. Another thing that does is it's really just the body trying to cheat. Because of where the hamstrings attach at the pelvis, the body's just trying to find better leverage to do more with less energy. So it doesn't realize you're trying to keep as much tension as possible on the hamstrings. It's realizing like, oh, it's fatiguing, or this is getting hard. I'm gonna make this easier. I'm gonna make some adjustments to my hip to get better leverage to keep being able to swing that up. So that's probably why you're feeling it a lot in your low back, is because of that sticking up of the butt and that arching that we're getting. So really when you set up, you wanna make sure first that the pivot point's lined up, then you want to engage your core and make sure that everything stays relatively stable. A ever so slight elevation at the hips is normal, but shooting it off of the pad or getting that arch that I was demonstrating here is not normal. And it will actually take away from the tension on your hamstrings. We don't want to do that. We really want to avoid that. Now, the other thing is, why may somebody's calves be feeling this way more than their hamstrings? You have a few different parts that make up your calves. One part is called the gastroc. Now, the gastroc is the superficial part, and it actually crosses the knee joint. So it does assist in this movement here of knee flexion. So when you're trying to bring your foot up and you're contracting your hamstring, guess what? The gastroc is also contracting. And the gastroc, when my leg is perfectly straight like this, the gastroc will be doing about 20% of that initial movement. So remember what I said that people like to do. They like to create a ton of momentum at the bottom, where the gastroc, your calves, are in a perfect position to initiate and take on a lot of that load. Well, if you use momentum, initiate and throw the pad up, what you're doing is you're creating a lot of tension in the calves, and then right when you get to the point where your hamstrings would actually take over, you've created so much momentum that you skip any real amount of tension needed in the hamstrings, and then you come back down again. So let me show you what that looks like laying down here in the machine. So like I said, down here at the bottom, when my legs are perfectly straight, the calves, or the gastroc particularly, since it crosses the knee joint, is in perfect position to actually initiate the bend at the knee. In this really, really straight position, because of where the hamstrings attach and cross the knee, they're actually at a disadvantage to begin this curl. But the calves are in a prime position to initiate the curl. So the first 20% here, 15-20% here, guess what? That is mainly calves. So if you are initiating from here, especially if you're creating a ton of momentum and driving it up, you are going to feel it a ton in your calves. So what I always suggest to people to do is that first 15-20 degrees, I want you to actually have it very controlled. And then when you get to about right here, where the hamstrings are in a really good position, now maybe you can create a little bit more force, or just make sure that you're taking that controlled speed throughout the whole movement, so that, yeah, your calves get a little here, that's great, but your hamstrings also get the amount of tension that they need. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is, maybe you can do this manually, or you can actually set the machine so that it kind of skips over that beginning portion a bit. Maybe if you really are like, look, my calves don't need it, I'm okay. I'm gonna really, really focus on my hamstrings. You're gonna raise this up a bit so that it's now in a better position to just stick with the hamstrings here. And then you can keep a ton of tension right there where you want it versus that straightening out and then, getting the calves to initiate that first movement. So maybe you skip over the first 10, 15, 20 degrees, or maybe you decide, no, I really want to work my calves in that position, but I just don't want them to take over the load. So I'm gonna make sure I have a steady approach during that first 15, 20 degrees, and then I can kind of use a more powerful or continue to use a steady rate as I go through that curl. So hopefully that breakdown of the lying leg curl has really helped you understand, one, we are creating some issues with that low back when we are pushing the butt up off of this pad a ton. So if your butt's going straight up in the air, stop it. Not only is it creating some issues with that low back being uncomfortable, especially under heavy loads, but your body is actually trying to relieve the tension of the hamstrings. And then last, remember the first 15, 20 degrees of a straight leg when you curl is going to be the gastroc, it is going to be the calves. So make sure you're not launching out of that bottom. Make sure it's more controlled there, or maybe skip the first 20, 15 degrees if you want to, and just stay a little bit above that so that you can just focus on keeping that tension right on the hamstrings, right where you want to. Okay guys, so hopefully that was helpful breaking down the lying leg curl and you feel empowered to go into the gym and kill it on this machine. If you have any questions about this or any other exercise, go ahead and let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, go ahead and click that like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and we'll see you next time.